A silver DeLorean streaking down a suburban street at 88 miles an hour. A wild-haired scientist shouting about gigawatts. A teenager on a skateboard, dodging traffic like he was born to do it. These images are burned into pop culture forever, and they all come from one movie that almost never got made the way we remember it. Back to the Future has been watched, quoted, and rewatched for 4 decades, and most fans could recite half the dialogue from memory. But there's a strange little secret buried inside this beloved film, a mistake that made it all the way to theaters, sat there in plain sight for years, and somehow slipped past directors, editors, and studio executives alike. Today we're digging into that blooper, along with the tangled path the movie took just to exist in the first place, the real-life skills that Star had to learn from scratch, and the surprising arguments that happened once the cameras stopped rolling. Stick around, because some of these stories are just as wild as anything that happens inside that time machine. It's hard to imagine a world without Back to the Future, but that world almost happened. Long before Marty McFly ever climbed into a DeLorean, writers Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis were struggling to get their script taken seriously. The idea had been kicking around since the early 1980s, born out of a simple question Gale asked himself after finding his father's old high school yearbook. Would he and his dad have been friends if they'd gone to school together? That small personal question turned into one of the most beloved time travel stories ever told. But getting there was a fight. More than 40 different studios looked at the script and said no. The reasoning at the time seems almost quaint now. Executives felt the story wasn't edgy enough. The early 1980s were dominated by raunchy teen comedies packed with crude humor and a clean, family-friendly adventure about a kid accidentally interfering with his parents' romance didn't fit the mold studios were chasing. Doors kept closing. Everything changed once Zemeckis had a genuine box office hit with Romancing the Stone. Suddenly a director with proven commercial appeal was attached to this quirky time travel script, and Universal Pictures took notice. The project that had been rejected dozens of times finally found a home, proving that sometimes timing matters just as much as talent. Here's a piece of trivia that still surprises casual fans. Michael J. Fox was the filmmaker's first choice to play Marty, but he wasn't available when production began. He was tied up filming the sitcom Family Ties, and the show's producers wouldn't release him. Rather than wait, the production moved forward with a different young actor, Eric Stoltz, in the role. Filming actually got underway with Stoltz as Marty, but as the weeks went on, Zemeckis grew uneasy. Stoltz was a talented performer, but his interpretation of the character leaned more dramatic and intense, which clashed with the lighter, comedic tone the story needed. Behind the scenes, the production quietly kept pursuing Fox, hoping something might change. Eventually it did. Fox read the script and loved it immediately, calling it one of the best scripts he'd ever come across. He agreed to take on the grueling challenge of filming Back to the Future during the day and Family Ties in the evenings, essentially working 2 full-time jobs at once. Recasting the lead midway through production wasn't cheap. It reportedly added several $1 million to the budget and forced the crew to reshoot nearly everything already filmed. It was a massive gamble, but nobody today would argue it wasn't worth it. Interestingly, not every trace of Stoltz vanished from the finished film. Fans have pointed to the diner scene where Marty punches Biff, noting subtle differences in lighting and framing that suggest it's actually a leftover shot from the Stoltz era, quietly kept in the final cut, because reshooting every single angle wasn't practical. Playing Marty McFly required more than acting range. It required actual physical skill. Across the trilogy, Marty skateboards through crowded streets, shreds a guitar solo in front of a packed gymnasium, fires a revolver in the Old West, and even learns to handle a horse. None of it was fake with obvious camera tricks. Fox insisted on doing as much as possible for real, because he wanted the character to feel authentic rather than assembled through editing shortcuts. That meant constant training sessions squeezed into an already brutal schedule. Fox has talked openly about how disorienting it was to be learning a new physical skill practically every week of filming. One day working with a guitar instructor, the next day getting horseback riding lessons, and somewhere between figuring out how to convincingly wield a gun for the Western-themed third film. He's joked since then that he picked up an enormous number of random skills during those years, and then promptly forgot almost all of them once filming wrapped, since there was rarely a reason to keep practicing. The most famous example of his dedication is the Johnny B. Good performance at the school dance. Fox already knew how to play guitar, but the filmmakers wanted every finger movement on screen to sync perfectly with the pre-recorded track. He worked closely with a music instructor to break the song down note by note until his hand positions matched exactly what audiences would hear. A choreographer was also brought in to help him nail the stage movements, drawing inspiration from classic rock performers of earlier decades. The result is a scene that still gets audiences cheering, largely because it doesn't feel like a stunt double or a trick shot. It feels like a kid who's genuinely losing himself in the music. As the trilogy progressed, the story demanded something technically absurd. Multiple versions of Marty interacted with each other in the same shot at the same time in perfect sync. Traditional filmmaking tricks for split-screen work simply weren't precise enough to sell the illusion convincingly. To solve the problem, the production turned to industrial light and magic. The visual effects house responsible for some of the era's most groundbreaking work. They engineered a specialized motion control camera system that could repeat an exact computer-programmed movement multiple times. This allowed the crew to film Fox performing one version of Marty, then rewind the camera to its exact starting position and film him performing a second version, with the two performances later combined seamlessly. It was an enormous technical achievement for its time, and it's part why those doubling scenes still hold up decades later, instead of looking dated the way a lot of older effects work does. With all that careful engineering going into the trickiest effects shots, it's almost funny that one of the simplest scenes in the entire film contains an error that slipped past everyone. Early in the movie, there's a moment where Marty plugs his electric guitar directly into Doc's enormous, fully powered amplifier that's already cranked to maximum volume. In real life, any guitarist will tell you that plugging a live cable into an instrument while an amp is already on and turned all the way up produces an instant, deafening pop, not silence followed by a slow build-up. The scene plays out backward from how it would actually happen, and yet it made it through years of editing, test screenings, and reshoots without anyone flagging it. It's a small thing, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And it's a perfect example of how even meticulously produced films, with all their storyboards, technical advisors, and endless script revisions, can have something obvious hiding in plain sight, simply because everyone involved was too close to the material to catch it. One of the most serious controversies connected to the franchise didn't happen on set at all. It happened during production of a sequel. Crispin Glover played George McFly in the original film, delivering one of its most memorable performances as Marty's timid, awkward father. When it came time to make the second movie, Glover declined to return, largely due to a pay dispute and creative disagreements over the story's message. Rather than simply recasting the role and moving forward, the production made an unusual choice. They had kept a mold of Glover's face from prosthetic work done during the first film, and they used that mold to create makeup applied to a different actor, Jeffrey Weissman, so he could visually resemble Glover in scenes as an older George McFly. From a distance, in dim lighting, it created a passable illusion. Glover was furious when he found out. His objection wasn't about being replaced. He said publicly that if they'd simply cast someone else in a role, he would have had no problem with that at all. What upset him was that his actual likeness had been used without his permission or consent. He pursued legal action, and the case was eventually settled out of court. The dispute became a landmark moment in entertainment law, prompting the industry to rethink how contracts address an actor's image and likeness, an issue that has only grown more relevant with the rise of digital de-aging and AI-generated recreations of performers' faces today. Few jokes in the movie land quite like the moment Marty casually mentions that Ronald Reagan is president in 1985, only for Doc Brown to react with total disbelief, shouting something along the lines of the actor. It's a clever bit of writing that plays on Reagan's real career as a Hollywood performer decades before he entered politics, appearing in dozens of films from the late 1930s through the early 1960s. What makes the joke even better is how the real president reacted to it. Reports from the time say Reagan enjoyed the line so much that he had it replayed for him. He was such a fan of the film overall that he referenced one of his most famous lines, the one about not needing roads, during a State of the Union address in 1986. It's a rare and slightly surreal thing, a sitting president quoting a joke that was partly written at his own expense, and it speaks to just how deeply the movie had already embedded itself into the culture within a single year of release. Not every disagreement on set involved lawyers. Some were simply loud, in-the-moment arguments between creative people who cared deeply about getting things right. Crispin Glover, known for having very specific ideas about how George McFly should behave, reportedly clashed with director Robert Zemeckis over a scene involving a broomstick prop. The disagreement escalated to the point where other cast members retreated to their dressing rooms to avoid the fallout. Michael J. Fox is recalled peeking out his own dressing room at the same moment Christopher Lloyd did, and the two of them silently agreeing they wanted absolutely no part of whatever was happening. Moments like this are a reminder that even a film remembered today as lighthearted family entertainment was built through genuine friction, differing artistic visions, and strong personalities pushing back against each other. That kind of energy doesn't always show up on screen, but it's often part of what makes a project feel alive instead of mechanical. Test audiences for the original film had a reaction the filmmakers never anticipated. Early in the movie, Doc Brown's dog, Einstein, is placed inside a DeLorean during the first demonstration of time travel. When the car vanishes in a flash of light, audiences unfamiliar with the concept, since there were no trailers giving away the premise, reportedly gasped, believing the dog had just been killed. Screenwriter Bob Gale has talked about the eerie silence that fell over test screening crowds in that moment, before relief set in once it became clear the dog had simply traveled through time unharmed. It's a small but telling detail about how differently a story can land on a first viewing, before an audience knows what genre conventions to expect. What plays today as a fun, almost cute introduction to the time machine's mechanics originally landed as something closer to genuine shock. Christopher Lloyd's performance as Doc Brown is so iconic that it's difficult to imagine anyone else in the role. But casting could have gone very differently. According to Bob Gale, the production seriously considered Jeff Goldblum for the part before settling on Lloyd, and John Lithgow's name came up in early discussions as well. It's fascinating to think about how different the chemistry between Marty and Doc might have felt with a different actor bringing his own energy to the eccentric inventor. The trilogy's later chapters brought their own set of memorable behind-the-scenes stories. Thomas F. Wilson, who played the recurring villain Biff Tannen, took on a new ancestor character in the third film, the Old West outlaw Buford Mad Dog Tannen. Rather than relying on stunt doubles for every horse-related scene, Wilson reportedly spent considerable time training to ride and use a lasso himself, which is part why those sequences feel so convincing rather than obviously doubled. Christopher Lloyd also had a personal milestone in the third film. His character's romance with schoolteacher Clara, played by Mary Steenburgen, included his first ever on-screen kiss in his career up to that point. Steenburgen herself was reportedly hesitant to join the project initially, only agreeing after her own children, who loved the first two films, encouraged her to take the role. Filming wasn't without real danger either. During a hanging stunt sequence in the third film, Fox has written that the rigging didn't work quite as intended, and he briefly lost consciousness while suspended, an alarming moment that was caught in time before anything worse happened. The sequel also had a very different original concept. Bob Gale has said that early draft of the second film story was set in the late 1960s, with a storyline involving Marty's mother becoming a countercultural flower child who ends up in legal trouble, and a comedic idea of showing Doc Brown using drugs recreationally. Zemeckis eventually steered the story in a different direction entirely, deciding to revisit the events of the first film from new camera angles instead of inventing an entirely new time period, a structural choice that had rarely, if ever, been attempted in a mainstream sequel before. Beyond continuity slip-ups, the script itself contains a handful of factual stretches that eagle-eyed fans have picked apart over the years. One of the most quoted involves Doc setting the time machine's destination to the year zero, intending to witness the birth of Christ. Historians generally place that event several years before what we now label as year one, and there is no year zero in the calendar system at all. It jumps directly from 1 BC to 1 AD. Even setting aside the date confusion, a car traveling through time would still only relocate in space to wherever it currently sits, meaning the DeLorean would land in California, nowhere near the Middle East. Zemeckis later acknowledged the line was intended purely as a throwaway joke rather than something meant to hold up to scrutiny. There's also the memorable image of plutonium as a glowing red liquid loaded into a glass canister. In reality, plutonium is a solid metal with a silvery gray appearance that actually darkens and begins to flake when exposed to air, Nothing like the glowing liquid shown on screen, though it certainly makes for a more dramatic visual. A smaller, more obscure error involved a television reference. Marty mentions watching a specific episode of the classic sitcom, The Honeymooners on a Date, that doesn't actually match when that particular episode aired in real broadcast history. A minor slip that only classic TV enthusiasts would likely catch. Continuity errors are common in big productions, and Back to the Future has its share once you start looking closely. In the mall parking lot chase sequence, wide shots of the DeLorean speeding away were filmed before Fox had officially taken over the role, meaning it's technically Eric Stoltz behind the wheel in those particular frames. Invisible unless you already know to look for it. There's also a moment where Marty flips through a phone book searching for Doc's address, and the close-up shot of hand turning the pages clearly belongs to someone much older, with visible age spots, rather than matching a teenager's hand. Prop details shift as well. A flyer about the town's burning clock tower appears crisp and pristine in some shots and noticeably worn in others, changing appearance between cuts within the same short sequence. And in one especially clever bit of trivia noticed by attentive fans, a note that Marty's girlfriend Jennifer writes on the back of that same flyer later in the story somehow already appears on the flyer, the very first time it's handed to Marty, long before that scene supposedly happens. Background performers cause their own share of continuity headaches too. During the climactic clock tower rescue sequence, sharp-eyed viewers have spotted the same extra walking around a corner